Ladies and gentlemen, when she went silent, he didn't just lose her voice, he lost his peace. Because silence is not emptiness, it's the sound of every word she once spoke, finally catching up to him. You see, the moment she stopped explaining herself, he started hearing everything he refused to listen to. That's when the power shifted. That's when her quiet became his chaos. And that's when he realized her silence wasn't weakness, it was his reckoning. And ladies and gentlemen, there's something deeply unsettling about silence. It's powerful, haunting, and it speaks volumes without uttering a single word. When she went silent, it wasn't out of weakness. It wasn't because she didn't care. It was because she had cared too much for too long, and somewhere along the way, she realized her voice no longer reached him. She realized that explaining herself, defending herself, or trying to prove her worth had become an act of desperation rather than connection. So she stopped, and in that silence he felt something he never expected, the echo of his own mistakes. And when a woman goes silent, it's not because she has nothing to say, it's because she's said it all. Every plea, every warning, every truth ignored, dismissed, or taken for granted. Her silence isn't an absence of emotion, it's a declaration of self-respect. It's the moment she takes back the power she once handed over in pieces, hoping he'd handle it with care. But when he didn't, she realized that the only person who could protect her peace was herself. That's when the silence began. And that silence sits deafening to him, because he was used to her energy, he was used to her trying. He was used to her texts, her questions, her forgiveness. Her attention became his validation, her love his comfort zone. So, when she pulled back, his world tilted. The quiet wasn't comforting anymore, it was torture, because now, for the first time, he had to sit with himself. No more distractions, no more reassurance, just the mirror of his own behavior staring right back at him. And it's funny how people only realize your worth when your absence starts to sting. When her phone stops lighting up with his name, when the messages stop coming, when her laughter no longer fills his ears, that's when he begins to understand what he lost. But it's not the silence that drives him insane, it's what the silence represents. It represents her peace without him, her happiness that no longer requires his approval, and her strength that now exists independently. That realization cuts deeper than any argument ever could, and she didn't plan for it to end this way. She wanted it to work. She believed in his potential, saw his better side, fought for it even when he gave her reasons not to. But you can't build a future with someone who keeps destroying the present. You can't keep explaining your pain to someone who benefits from your confusion. So, one day she stopped trying, and in that moment she didn't lose him, he lost her, and that's the part people rarely understand. Silence isn't revenge, it's revelation. It's the moment you stop begging for love and start respecting yourself enough to let go. It's when you realize that closure doesn't always come from another person's explanation. It comes from your own decision to move on without it. When she went silent, she didn't do it to hurt him. She did it to heal herself, and in that healing, he began to unravel. And he went insane because control was gone. He couldn't manipulate her emotions anymore. He couldn't rely on her reaction to feel important. That silence stripped away his power. Every unanswered message, every ignored call, it forced him to feel the consequences of his choices. He finally experienced the emptiness he'd made her feel so many times before, but her silence wasn't cold, it was sacred. It was the sound of boundaries being rebuilt. It was the sound of a woman reclaiming her time, her peace, her self-worth. The same silence that drove him insane was the silence that saved her, because in that space she remembered who she was before he made her question herself. She remembered the strength she had buried beneath years of compromise and hope, and as he fell apart, she was reborn. Her silence became her language of healing. She stopped explaining what he refused to understand. She stopped seeking love in places that drained her spirit. Instead, she started building herself again piece by piece, quietly, powerfully, because sometimes silence is the loudest proof of transformation. And he replayed everything, every conversation, every moment he dismissed, every time he thought she'd never leave. He thought she'd always be there, waiting, forgiving, loving him through his chaos. But love that isn't respected eventually turns into distance. And that distance, once created, becomes irreversible. She didn't walk away in anger, she walked away in clarity. That's what makes silence so powerful. It's not fueled by emotion, but by realization. And when he saw her silence, he saw his reflection in it, the reflection of a man who took her kindness for granted, who mistook her patience for weakness. Now, without her words filling the air, he's forced to confront the truth. He's forced to face the fact that she was the peace he thought he could live without. And now that she's gone, he finally understands what chaos really feels like, and her silence made him listen in ways her words never could. Because when someone stops trying to convince you to see their worth, that's when you finally start to see it for yourself, but by then, it's too late. He realized that she didn't need to raise her voice to make a statement. Her absence spoke louder than any argument, louder than any plea for attention. Silence became her victory cry, the proof that she had finally chosen herself. And that's the lesson that shakes him to his core. He thought he had time. He thought she'd always come back, that her love was unconditional. But unconditional love doesn't mean endless tolerance. When she went silent, he learned that a woman's breaking point is not loud. It's quiet. It's not dramatic. It's calm. It's not a storm. It's the sunrise after it, when she finally realizes she doesn't need to fight anymore. And he went insane because he couldn't understand how someone so gentle could disappear so powerfully. He couldn't comprehend how silence could hold so much strength. But that's what happens when you underestimate someone who loves deeply. The same heart that could have forgiven you 1,000 times can also choose peace once and never look back. And she went silent not to punish him, but to protect herself, not to make him chase her, but to stop chasing the version of him that didn't exist. And while he's left wrestling with his regrets, she's out there rediscovering joy in the simplest things, peaceful mornings, laughter with friends, the feeling of finally being free. Because silence is not the absence of love, it's the presence of wisdom, and he's haunted by what could have been, but she's finally free from what never was. And though his mind spins in circles trying to understand her silence, she's already found peace in it. Because when she went silent, she didn't disappear, she simply became untouchable, and he couldn't sleep. The silence followed him into every corner of his life. It echoed in the spaces where her laughter used to live, in the moments that used to feel full and now felt hollow. He replayed their conversations, looking for signs, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she began to slip away. But it didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, as he kept taking from her without giving back. Every unanswered message, every dismissive tone, every time he made her feel like her feelings were too much, those were the quiet cracks that led to her silence. And now, those same cracks had become canyons he couldn't cross, and she didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she started loving herself. There's a difference between giving up and choosing peace. She realized that holding on to someone who constantly made her question her worth wasn't strength, it was self-betrayal. She'd been strong long enough, and strength, she learned, sometimes looks like walking away with nothing but your dignity intact. So she went silent, not as a weapon, but as a shield, and while he spiraled into confusion, wondering why she suddenly seemed so distant, she was finally beginning to understand herself. She started to see the beauty in her own company, the peace in not explaining herself to someone who was never really listening. Her silence wasn't a void, it was growth. It was the quiet rebuilding of a woman who had been broken by overextending her heart. And he thought she'd come back like she always did. He thought a little charm, a half-hearted apology, or a few familiar words could pull her back into orbit. But this time was different. This time, she'd learned to love the sound of her own silence more than the sound of his excuses. She'd found power in her restraint, clarity in her distance, and strength in her solitude. Because when a woman learns that silence can be her armor, she becomes untouchable. And he used to believe that her love was infinite, that no matter what he did, she'd always be there. But love that's constantly tested eventually runs out of oxygen. He took for granted that she'd never stop caring, but what he didn't realize is that silence doesn't come when love disappears. It comes when pain outweighs hope. It comes when she's cried every tear, argued every point, and finally decides that peace is worth more than potential. And that's when the shift happens. He starts to notice her glow again. Not the glow she had when she was trying to please him, but the one she has now that she's pleasing herself. The quiet confidence that comes from no longer needing to be understood by someone who refused to see her. The lightness that comes from no longer begging for love that was never freely given. It drives him crazy because now he sees her differently. He sees what he ignored. He sees what he lost, and he watches as she rebuilds her life piece by piece. Her laughter returns, but it's no longer for him. Her attention is elsewhere, on herself, her goals, her peace. And in that silence, she becomes magnetic again, not because she's playing games, but because she's truly free. People underestimate how powerful a healed woman is. Her silence becomes her rebirth, and her energy speaks louder than her words ever did. And he used to be the center of her thoughts, the reason she couldn't sleep, the voice in her head that she tried to please. Now he's just a lesson, a memory tucked away in the quiet corners of her mind. Because when a woman decides she's done explaining why she deserves better, she doesn't shout it, she lives it. She starts saying no more often. She stops answering messages that don't bring peace. She no longer entertains energy that drains her. Her silence becomes her standard, and he can't stand it. The silence feels like rejection, but it's not. It's her protection. It's her finally learning that love isn't supposed to feel like confusion, and attention isn't supposed to come with conditions. He's addicted to her absence now, constantly checking if she's noticed him, waiting for her to break the silence, waiting for some sign that she still cares. But she's not watching anymore, she's not waiting, because the silence that once belonged to him now belongs to her healing. And she used to pour her heart out in messages he'd ignore, hoping that one day he'd respond differently. Now, the messages stay unsent and her heart stays unbroken. She used to chase closure, now she realizes she doesn't need it. Because closure doesn't come from hearing "I'm sorry," it comes from saying "I deserve more" and meaning it. Her silence is not a punishment, it's a graduation. She's graduated from needing someone who couldn't meet her halfway. And he feels it every day in ways he can't describe. The things that used to make him feel powerful now feel empty. The attention from others doesn't fill the void she left. He scrolls through old photos, replays old memories, looking for comfort, but all he finds is silence. Because once you've lost the person who truly cared, you begin to realize that superficial connections can't replace genuine love. Her silence haunts him not because it's cold, but because it's final, and she's no longer the same. Her silence transformed her. She's learned to trust herself again, to find joy in stillness, to see that peace isn't something someone gives you. It's something you create when you stop allowing chaos to take up space in your life. Her silence isn't emptiness, it's alignment. It's the sound of her choosing herself every day, of prioritizing her mental and emotional health over the comfort of familiarity. And as she evolves, he begins to understand the cost of what he lost. He starts to remember all the moments she showed up when he didn't, all the times she believed in him when he doubted himself, all the love she gave when he wasn't ready to receive it. And now that she's silent, he finally hears it, the truth she'd been saying all along, that love without effort dies, and attention without consistency means nothing. And her silence teaches him more than her words ever could. He begins to understand that communication isn't just about speaking, it's about showing up. Love isn't about promises, it's about presence, and respect isn't earned through charm, it's earned through consistency. She was never asking for too much, he was giving too little, and now that she's gone, he's left trying to fill the void she left with noise that never satisfies. And the irony is, the silence he once ignored has now become the loudest thing in his world. It reminds him every day of what he lost. It whispers the truth at night when the distractions fade, that she didn't leave because she stopped loving. She left because she couldn't keep loving someone who wouldn't meet her there. And no matter how many times he replays the past, he can't undo the moment she realized her peace mattered more than his presence. And meanwhile, she's not bitter, she's better. Her silence has made her softer in spirit but stronger in boundaries. She doesn't need to prove her worth anymore, she embodies it. She doesn't need to explain why she left, her peace explains it for her. And while he goes insane trying to decode her silence, she's already found the answers within herself. And her silence is the bridge between who she was and who she's becoming. It's the moment she stops being the version of herself shaped by his validation and becomes the version built by her own self, love. It's the rebirth that only happens when you stop fighting for people who won't fight for you. And though he'll never admit it out loud, he knows it. She didn't just walk away, she outgrew him. And that's what truly drives him insane, not just her silence, but what it represents. It represents her freedom, her healing, her evolution. It represents every moment she chose to love herself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. He'll try to reach her again, maybe even promise change, but she's not waiting for apologies anymore. She's living in her truth now, and silence is her peace treaty with the past. And because once a woman learns to be comfortable in her own silence, she no longer needs anyone to fill it. And he tried to move on. He told himself he was fine, that he didn't need her, that she was just another chapter in his story. But no matter how many new faces he surrounded himself with, none of them could silence the echo she left behind. The laughter of others didn't sound the same, the conversations lacked depth, and every new connection felt like a shadow of what he once had. He didn't realize it then, but he wasn't chasing her, he was chasing the feeling of being seen the way she saw him. Because when she looked at him, she didn't just see what he showed the world, she saw what he tried to hide. And now that she was gone, he realized how rare that kind of connection really was, and he started noticing her everywhere. In the way someone laughed across the room, in a song that played on the radio, in the smell of coffee that reminded him of mornings they once shared. It wasn't her, but it was enough to remind him of the silence she left behind, and that silence, it grew louder every day. Because the thing about losing someone who truly cared is that you don't just lose a person, you lose a reflection of the best version of yourself. He missed who he was when she believed in him. He missed the way she made him want to be better, not because she asked him to, but because she inspired it. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, that silence became unbearable. It wasn't just her absence he felt, it was the absence of the peace he took for granted. He began to understand that silence isn't empty, it's full of all the things you didn't say. Every apology left unspoken, every moment you could have chosen love but chose ego instead. It all lingers in the quiet. And that's when it hit him. Her silence wasn't just the end, it was the consequence, and she had given him chance after chance to show up, and he didn't. Not because he didn't care, but because he thought she'd always wait. He thought she'd always be the one to fix things, to forgive, to hold it all together. But the truth is, even the strongest hearts get tired. Even the kindest souls reach a breaking point. She had warned him, not with words, but with the way her tone softened, the way her energy dimmed, the way her eyes stopped lighting up when she looked at him. Those were the silent signs that she was fading, and when she finally stopped speaking, it wasn't out of spite, it was out of exhaustion. And she wasn't angry anymore. Anger would have meant she still had energy to care. What replaced anger was peace, the kind that comes when you've finally accepted that not everyone you love is meant to stay. She found beauty in letting go. She stopped replaying what went wrong and started focusing on what she learned. Her silence became her sanctuary, her protection from chaos. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone anymore. The ones who truly understood her wouldn't need words, and meanwhile, he tried to fill the void she left with distractions. He buried himself in work, in people, in noise, but nothing could drown out the sound of her absence. Because when you lose someone who once felt like home, the world never feels the same again. You can decorate new rooms, visit new places, meet new faces, but home isn't something you find, it's something you feel. And he had lost that feeling the moment she went silent, and he began to realize that love doesn't die all at once, it fades through neglect. Every time he chose indifference over effort, every time he dismissed her needs as overreactions, every time he made her feel alone even when he was right beside her, that's when he was losing her. Her silence wasn't a sudden decision, it was the final result of 1,000 small heartbreaks, and she, on the other hand, began to bloom again. Slowly, quietly, she rediscovered herself. The woman who once doubted her worth began to see it clearly. She started doing things that made her soul feel alive again. She stopped waiting for validation and started trusting her own voice. Her silence, once misunderstood as weakness, became her strength. She didn't need to prove her power to anyone. It radiated naturally. Because when a woman learns to find peace within herself, no one can take it from her again, and people saw the change in her. There was something different about her energy, calm, confident, untouchable. She no longer chased love, she attracted it. Not because she needed someone, but because she had become someone she was proud of. Her silence taught her that the love she had been searching for was never out there, it was within her all along. She didn't need to be chosen, she needed to choose herself, and he watched from afar, realizing that the silence he once thought he could handle had become unbearable. He missed her laughter, her advice, her warmth. He missed the version of himself that only existed when she believed in him. But by the time he understood what she meant to him, she had already learned to live without him. That's the cruel beauty of silence. It gives you time to grow, but it doesn't guarantee you'll grow together. And he tried reaching out, but her responses were brief, polite, distant. She wasn't cold, she was healed. There's a difference between being bitter and being done. She didn't wish him harm, she simply wished herself peace. And for the first time, he realized that her silence wasn't personal, it was necessary. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about her evolution, and he found himself caught between regret and realization. Regret for all the moments he didn't show up, and realization that her silence was the loudest lesson he'd ever receive. She had taught him that love isn't about possession, it's about presence, that communication isn't just about talking, it's about understanding. And that silence, when it comes from someone who once spoke love into your life, is the most powerful message of all. And while he was unraveling, she was becoming. Her silence gave her space to dream again, to rebuild the life she had put on hold while waiting for someone to meet her halfway. She learned that love shouldn't require you to lose yourself, that real connection feels peaceful, not painful. The same silence that drove him insane became the silence that shaped her into her highest self. And though he tried to move forward, he couldn't escape the truth that she was the one who saw him completely. He missed how she listened without judgment, how she loved without conditions, how she believed in him when no one else did. But what he missed most was the version of her that would have stayed if he had given her a reason to. Because once a woman chooses silence, she's no longer waiting, she's walking away with grace, and she didn't need to announce her worth, she lived it. She didn't need to prove she had healed, her peace said it for her. And as he replayed the past, trying to make sense of how it all slipped away, she was already writing a new story, one that didn't begin with heartbreak, but with rebirth. And that's the thing about silence, it's not empty. It's full of decisions, realizations, and quiet revolutions. It's the sound of boundaries being built, of lessons being learned, of hearts being restored. She didn't need to speak her truth anymore because she was living it. And while he remained stuck in the noise of regret, she had found the music in her own stillness. And he never understood that her silence wasn't the absence of love, it was the presence of self-respect. And now, that silence has become the loudest reminder of what happens when you take someone's love for granted. She went silent because she finally realized that the peace she was looking for could never exist in the chaos he brought. And as he wrestles with the madness her absence created, she continues to rise quietly, confidently, completely free. And he started to understand that time doesn't heal what you refuse to face. The silence wasn't just something that happened to him, it was something he caused. It became a mirror, forcing him to confront every careless word, every ignored moment, every time he thought her patience was infinite. It showed him the truth. She didn't vanish suddenly, she faded slowly, right in front of him, while he was too distracted to notice. And now, he was living in the aftermath of his own neglect, surrounded by the echoes of what once was, haunted by the silence that used to be her laughter. And he began to see how silence changes people. For her, it became her sanctuary. For him, it became his prison. She used it to rebuild, to breathe, to find clarity. He used it to overthink, to regret, to break down the illusions he once clung to. It's strange how the same silence can mean healing for one person and heartbreak for another. She used it to rise, he drowned in it. And she was no longer waiting for apologies that would never come, or for someone to understand what she had already outgrown. Her silence was no longer about him, it was about her peace. She had found strength in solitude, learned the art of walking away with grace, and mastered the power of not reacting. Because silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the decision to protect your energy rather than prove your point. She realized that not everyone deserves access to her voice, and that sometimes saying nothing speaks louder than any explanation ever could. And he couldn't understand it. He thought silence meant indifference, but it didn't. It meant evolution. It meant she had outgrown the need to be understood by those unwilling to listen. He used to think her silence was cold, but it was actually kind. It spared him the harshness of the words she could have said. It was her way of saying, I've accepted this for what it is, and I no longer need to fight it. Her silence was forgiveness without reconciliation, closure without conversation. And he tried to recreate her presence with others, but nothing compared. Conversations felt shallow, laughter felt forced, and even the moments of affection lacked depth. Because when you've been loved by someone who saw your soul, surface-level attention feels like starvation. He didn't just lose her, he lost the emotional home she created, and that loss cut deeper than any argument, any goodbye, any word she could have ever spoken. And she, meanwhile, began to move through the world differently. There was a lightness in her step, a calmness in her eyes, a sense of quiet certainty that only comes from surviving what was meant to break you. She no longer sought validation, she exuded it. Her silence became her power, her confidence her language. The people around her noticed it, the way she carried herself, the way she no longer chased what drained her. She had learned that real strength isn't loud. It's calm, consistent, and deeply rooted in self-respect. And there was a time when she would have done anything to make him understand her heart. Now she understood that true understanding doesn't need convincing. Love shouldn't feel like a debate. It shouldn't require you to lose your voice just to keep someone else comfortable. So she stayed silent, not because she didn't have words, but because she finally realized she didn't need to use them to prove her worth. Her peace became her statement, and he started to envy her stillness, how she could walk into a room and command it without saying a word. How her absence had more presence than his existence. That realization tormented him, because he finally understood that silence is not the absence of power, it's the presence of control. And she had mastered it. She wasn't punishing him, she was protecting herself. And he tried to distract himself with noise, music, friends, laughter that never quite reached his eyes. But silence always found him. It followed him into the night, into the empty spaces between thoughts. It whispered to him that she wasn't coming back, that no amount of apologies could undo the damage done by his inconsistency. He tried to convince himself that she would miss him, that she would break her silence first, but she didn't. Because once a woman realizes that peace feels better than attention, she never goes back, and while he battled his guilt, she was thriving. Her silence wasn't lonely, it was liberating. She had created a life that no longer revolved around waiting for someone else's effort. She was focused, fulfilled, glowing. She learned that she could give herself everything she once begged for. The attention, the care, the respect, it all began within her. She no longer needed to chase anyone because she had learned to stay still and let the right people find her. And that was the power of her silence. It attracted better things, opportunities, friendships, love that didn't ask her to shrink. She became the kind of woman who no longer tolerated half-effort. Her boundaries weren't walls, they were gates that protected her peace. Her silence became her filter. If you couldn't handle her quiet, you didn't deserve her energy, and he began to realize something else. Silence isn't always peaceful. For him, it became the loudest consequence of his own actions. It made him confront what he had ignored for so long. It stripped away the distractions and left him with the truth, that he had been loved deeply, and he had taken that love for granted. That's the cruelty of silence. It doesn't give you answers. It forces you to sit with the questions. It makes you feel everything you once made someone else feel, and she, on the other hand, had stopped asking questions. She no longer wondered why things happened the way they did. She had made peace with the fact that some endings don't need closure, they need acceptance. Her silence was her acceptance. She stopped chasing explanations and started building a future where her happiness didn't depend on anyone else's behavior. And that's what made her truly powerful, the ability to find peace without needing anyone to apologize for disturbing it. And he watched from the outside as her silence transformed her into someone unrecognizable. She wasn't bitter, she wasn't cold, she was free. And nothing unsettles a person more than seeing someone they hurt move on gracefully, because grace is louder than revenge. Her silence wasn't about proving a point, it was about choosing peace over pride. And while he fought with regret, she was busy creating a life that reflected her growth, not her pain. And he began to understand that silence can be the most brutal teacher. It doesn't yell, it doesn't blame, it just shows you what's left when everything else is gone. He realized that the same silence he once dismissed now ruled his world. It was in the empty messages, the unanswered calls, the memories that played like unfinished songs. Silence had become his karma, and her peace was his consequence, and meanwhile she continued to evolve. Her silence became her foundation, a reminder that her value was never tied to someone's attention. She no longer looked for closure in others, she found it in her own growth. She realized that every time she had chosen herself in the past, life had rewarded her with something better. Her silence was her faith, faith that she didn't need to fight for what was meant for her, and that what left was never meant to stay. And he now understood that the silence that drove him insane was never punishment, it was truth. It was her way of saying, "This is what life feels like without me." And that truth was unbearable. Because, in her silence, he finally understood the depth of what he had lost. He understood that love isn't about who talks the loudest, but about who listens the deepest. And while she had listened, he had only heard what he wanted to, and she no longer needed to look back. The silence had done its job. It had healed her, strengthened her, and taught her everything she needed to know. And for him, it became the lesson he would never forget, the realization that silence is not the absence of love, but the moment love stops needing to prove itself.